All right, so this is going to be my sprint update for Sprint 3, 621 to 7.5. Um, I will flip over here and that should have everything set up. All right, we'll walk through this sprint update real quick. Pardon the dogs barking in the back if you do happen to be able to hear them. So currently right now, what I am working on, I spent the last week building out my VM stack. I was able to get my hands on an old computer that I had put some additional RAM into, so it had 16 gigs in it, and I was able to actually use that. It was enough that I could get some stuff kind of semi-functional. So I built out a stack in Fusion. I used 3 instances of ESXi, um, and I got those loaded in. I loaded vCenter onto one of those. I found a walkthrough, which is what I'm talking about here, where somebody basically kind of taught or walked you through how to build a vSphere lab in Fusion. So I kind of used that as my template or the way to kind of get something put together. And it was good because the way that they built theirs out, they built it out on a computer that was similarly spec'd to the one that I was building it on. So kind of the same challenges that they encountered, I encountered, and they had some workarounds and solutions for some of those. Um, Biggest challenge with the way that my setup is right now is that the vCenter VM is a pretty major memory hog. It needs 10 gigs to run, basically, is what it says. I was able to get it loaded and running and then pull it back to 8 and get it to run off of that for the ESXi instance that is hosting it. But because of that, I worked through this whole process, loading in each of those, pulling them into vCenter. Um, he goes through a process of building individual switches, virtual switches for each of those ESXi's, and then building a distributed switch. So I did all of that, build out that distributed switch, and then go through the process of I was also able to get live migration set up. So I have been able to do that with some VMs. But to finish that, you have to, you probably already know this, but the ESXi instances have to be put into maintenance mode to attach them to the switch based off of what I've been able to find. Um, and as a result, because the vCenter VM is such a memory hog, I don't have the ability to assign enough memory to two of the ESXi hosts such that I can migrate it from one to the other and maintain that vCenter functionality um, such that I can take that last host and put it into maintenance mode to attach it to that distributed switch. So that's basically the bottleneck that I've hit. I've tried to do a couple different things to kind of band-aid that, and it won't work. Um, I I'm hitting up on the limit of what that computer is able to do. It's pretty frequently sitting at 15 of the 16 gigs utilized and starts to get really laggy after about an hour or so. Um, so I had gotten AJ set up. It looks like all three of the hosts register it, and they indicate heartbeat links to. Oh, the other thing that I did was built out an Ubuntu um, server to basically function as a loon. Where the example that he gave, you utilize an ISCSI um, attachment. So I was able to get that set up and create a shared data store. And so I'm able to migrate VM data to all of those, and I can migrate some of my smaller VMs host to host. But the vCenter one is the hang up, and I need that for the functionality to be able to put into maintenance mode and pull back out and do all that. So I've got some screenshots. I'll actually show those right now. This is from that cluster. This, I had an issue with it not responding, but that's because the uh, the the DNS server was not functioning. I had not turned it back on. So once I turned it back on, it did get some connection and was able to set it up. And I was able to link to the hosts and see the state says that they're running ESXi3, which is the one that is hosting vCenter, is showing that it is running. It is the master. The other two are showing that they have the agent on the host and they are the slave devices. But I can't really get past that. I don't know how I can't do, I've been wanting to try and do RDMA as kind of, that was my next step and going to be the thing that I was going to try and set up. And I don't think I can get past that. So um, going back to this, that has been the thing that I've spent the last week doing. I We talked last week a little bit about trying to figure out a way to get some sort of like maybe remote setup. I was able to get this computer on Tuesday of this last week, and I basically just spent the majority of this week working on trying to get that set up. Let's see. I was able to get some things accomplished outside of just that stack and was able to actually tick through everything that I had on Trello. I put together some schematics. So I got into Lucidchart a couple days ago and hammered out a handful of those things. I had a mess of sketches in some different 3-ring binders and stuff like that that I consolidated and cleaned up and put into Lucidchart. So I've got an L1 topology. I will be editing that, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And then I have a layout for the server stack, including the virtual machines, as well as some of the hardware that it's running off of. And I have kind of a schematic and plan for that put together. Let's see. I put together a chart with each of the devices. I'm going to have to add a little bit to and change some of that, which I will also talk about. But it has each device and the corresponding port. It has an address that's assigned to it, and then the port that it is plugged to on a corresponding device. So as like a tool for wiring once it comes to implementation. I've got that put together. I will have to do some editing because I am changing a little bit about the LAN setup, which I'll talk about in just a minute. As far as the tech spec, I added some hardware requirements and then some like installation guides for some of the software stuff. And then right now I'm trying to figure out how to demonstrate some of the functionality for test casing of this VM stack. It's kind of like this thing where I'm 90% there on having the functionality and I know how to do it. So I can create the plan for it. I just don't have the hardware to do it. There is that vSphere lab. It's just a general vSphere lab. They have some stuff about vSAN, but I was using the ISCSI setup. An idea that I had was to run the 3 hardware hosts with the VMs running off of that and have those attached to 2 separate Ubuntu-based servers that will have that data array on it, and then point to those through that ISCSI targeting methodology. So I can't really demonstrate that outside of what I have up to this point, where I have that targeted and am able to shift like VMware or sorry VM data to that and off of the native stuff on the ESXis. Um, let's see. So as far as challenges, upcoming items, biggest challenge or upcoming item, not really as much a challenge, is the put together the LAN. So I'm going to try and get together, I'm working the next couple days in GNS3 to put together a section of that campus LAN. The idea being that I'll do uh, the core distribution and then the server node of switches and not worry about the kind of client node that'll be servicing the department for all the other ancillary stuff. Um, so I'll have that set up such that I can demonstrate some of the fault tolerance and that kind of stuff. Let's see. So the challenge that I have right now is in the middle of this week while putting together that VM, I was chatting with George, I think during our weekly meeting, and we're talking about um, what we were going to be doing for that SLAN solution. And he had mentioned that he was going to be doing a spine and leaf setup. Talk about the modular kind of aspect of it, how it's very easy to scale, and that it's really simple. So I started reading a little bit about that, and it sounded really cool, sounded really interesting. I found a video of a guy that had implemented one. He was using OSPF ECMP for a layer 3 um, spine leaf setup. Um, and from what I read, it sounded like a really great solution because it creates that high throughput, lossless, quick recovery kind of scenario that you want. He was building his on some HPE servers or I'm sorry, not servers, uh, switches, and so I thought, okay, cool, I can do that. What I found out is that um, those switches have been deprecated and they've moved away from that. And so then I pivoted thinking, well, I probably could figure out some sort of Cisco alternative for that. And then I figured out that that is actually the ACI. I hadn't really looked at that much because of um, you're indicating that it was pretty cost prohibitive. So I wasn't familiar with it. And in looking, I didn't recognize that those were the same technology. So that's where I am going back to now. I'm going to do that more classic core distribution and access breakdown of a campus LAN. Um, from a hardware standpoint, I'm basically only tacking in two more devices. Um, so that shouldn't be too bad from like an increased cost standpoint. Obviously, the uh, software costs as far as like OS is going to be a lot less. And I'll need to do some restructuring. The way that I had addressed and laid everything out, because it was doing OSPF between each link, you had a little network in between each link. So the way that I set it up, I addressed it that way. So I'll need to readdress to be compliant with that more traditional campus setup, but wanted to change any of the links from a hardware standpoint or a layer 1 standpoint. And then I can just put together sort of the layer 2 breakdown for that. So I'm pivoting to that. I've already started building some of it out into GNS3. I'll be working on that some more tonight. And then just try and get that put together so that I can run some tests through that and have something put together. Um, let's see. So from a testing standpoint, I don't really know how I'm going to be able to test the VM setup any more than I have. Um, trying to be creative in like ways. I'll do one where I think I'll, either be pinging or sending something from one of the, I have a test Ubuntu server loaded up to one of the hosts in that cluster, and I can either through just pinging it or maybe doing some sort of file transfer, uh, live migrate that either from a different data store, or maybe do it through a computational and through a data store just to kind of demonstrate that. Um, but I don't know how to make it work beyond that, and I'm already so far behind from that, having only been able to start building it out in the last week, that I feel like for having only worked on it for like 6 days, I feel like I've gotten a lot of progress and I have a lot to show for it, and it's time to move on and do the next thing. So I will be working mostly on kind of land setup and testing of that. Um, yeah, I feel like I'm getting rambly and talking a lot, so I'm going to work through the rest of this really quickly. Um, Final tech spec, I kind of talked about this, but I added some topology designs that I made in Lucidcharts. Um, I did the wiring and addressing document, which I can flip over to. I'll show you that right now. Here we go. So in here, a handful of updates. So I got this put together, and I can use this even as a base for, I'll probably do another one with some addressing on it. Um, I'll use this and throw over some of the VLAN domains that I throw in, and that kind of thing. And then the only addition will be that I will um, throw in, I'm pointing with my fingers, which you're not gonna be able to see, but I'll throw in another set of switches basically like this in between this layer here, and then have that more traditional design. This is the one that I put together for the server. So the blue will be your hardware layer, and then VMs living on top in that vSphere. And I think that's it. Yeah, this is the addressing that I put together. So let's see quickly from a Trello standpoint. I will say I'm actually pretty stoked, considering the fact that I got kind of rabbit holed into the building out the VM. I did tick off everything that I had for Sprint 3. I which is I feel like is good. I built out that VM stack to the extent that I feel like I'll be able to. I've defined a lot of different aspects in that uh, addressing chart and linking chart. I did one for each of the campuses, so I'll be able to easily go back and do the same thing once I adjust the addressing. As far as what I'm going to be doing this next one, I want to get that layer 2 stuff defined for the campus LAN, since I am going back to that more traditional method. Um, I have in here what open source SDN. I'm fairly certain that I'm going to be doing uh, Open Daylight. So I will get that set up. Let's see, building out that stuff in GNS3. Um, I want to put in some more detailed information as far as like configuration of the ESXi host from the perspective of having something for reference for an implementation standpoint. Let's see, and then the rest of this is going to be like some questions to answer. Um, WAN solution, I mean, I'm going to do leased lines and have leased lines in between each of the campuses, and have two edge devices to address what you had mentioned about that being a single point of failure. And then I'll do some routing protocols to do that. Uh, let's see. Yeah, I have RDMA lab. I put this in and then I looked a little bit earlier today, and I can't find anything. I'm almost all the way through the like general vSphere lab, and I have not seen anything with that yet. But if I do, then I'll try and like run through that process while I have the lab up and take some screenshots so that I can use that as a test case. So that's it for that. Um, as far as lessons learned so far, it's not really going to look like I have a lot to show for this, but I I feel pretty stoked on what I've been able to do in the last handful of days. I actually have been out of work for the last 3 months because I was bartending, and so I've had a lot of time to put into uh, this aspect of it this week, and probably put in a solid 35 hours. Basically, it just was a full-time job, to the point that I was dreaming about it, quite literally, and it definitely has permeated my skull pretty solidly. So that's been cool. I feel like I've learned a lot about vSphere, and that implementation, which has been really interesting. Um, I definitely know that I am also still behind, and so I'm kind of like with last sprint. I'm just continuing to chug along. I don't really have illusions that I'm going to get to a point where I have this complete at the end, but I'm just going to keep working towards it and kind of see what happens. I am trying to treat this as a learning experience, and so I mean, it's a class, so it obviously is. But from the perspective of I've addressed this, this is a pretty new process for me, and so I've been trying to kind of work on on getting more comfortable with it and being uh, receptive to kind of that aspect of it. So yeah, that's lessons learned so far. I'm probably as stoked about the progress and where I'm at in this progress as or in this process and project as I have been up to this point. What I have to show for that probably does not look all that great, but it's still pretty cool. I've really enjoyed this last week, as challenging as it has been. So I'm excited to spend the next 2 weeks trying to hammer out as much as I can, and then uh, see what I've got put together at the end to present to you. So appreciate it, and yeah, I will probably talk to you some in the next 2 weeks with questions. Thank you.